We always try to think about how to make a brand new year better. We look at they, the government. We talk about all the things that are wrong, the lying, the deal-making, the polarization. We look at what's happening in the world. We look at the things like the attack yesterday on the George Hebdo satirical publication and the 12 people who died there. We see the attacks in the cafe in Australia not too long ago. We see the attacks around the world on a regular basis. But we look at our country, we say, what something doesn't feel right. What is it that doesn't feel right? Michael Barone wrote an article about 2 days ago. And Michael Barone is on a number of TV channels and so forth, and a good columnist. I've read some of his things, and some of it's okay. This article was, I thought, pretty good. And it was entitled, Family Fragmentation, Can Anything Be Done? When you think about government and when you think about the very base government that we have, what can be more base in terms of rules and getting together and working in a small society than a family? And I couldn't think of anyone better to join me in talking about this very special thing this morning than Michael Geer, and he's going to be with us in just a moment. He's the president of the Pennsylvania Family Institute. But I want to invite you today, too, in this hour to call. Whenever you're moved to, at 1-800-357-0910. You can also email me at gary.sutton@cumulus.com, and you can tweet me if you'd like at Gary G. Sutton. I want you to take part in this. It's very important. Family fragmentation. Can anything be done to put the genie back in the bottle here? And what is it doing to our country? We're going to examine that this hour. And I want to know from those of you, we've all been part of a family in some way, shape, or form. We either were a member of it, we were a father or mother of it, we were a brother or sister in it, but we've all been part of families, divorced and otherwise. So we want to talk this morning about this and get at it. And we welcome Michael Geer, president of the Pennsylvania Family Institute, to the show. Michael, great to have you in this morning. Happy New Year to you.
Same to you, Gary. Great to be with you.
Michael, I know you had a chance probably to read this article too. I thought it was a fascinating article, and it touches on a number of things you and I have talked about from time to time. But one of the questions that it asks is, what is family fragmentation? And it says the facts are easy to state. About 40% of babies born in America these days are born outside of marriage. That's true of about 30% of non-Hispanic whites, more than 50% of Hispanics, and more than 70% of blacks. Born outside of wedlock. And so we say, okay, what's the big deal? But when you look back, 1965, it points out in this article, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the senator from New York, wrote a report on the black family when the out-of-wedlock birth rate of blacks was about 25%, far lower than it is now. He believed correctly. This spelled trouble ahead, and a half century later, we figure out that he's probably right. And then they say Scandinavian countries also have high out-of-marriage birth rates, but the couples tend to stay together and raise their children to adulthood. In America, not so much. So that certainly points out a problem to me as far as the family fragmentation. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And going beyond that, though, then those numbers, the high percentage of babies that are born into single-parent families, born out of wedlock, et cetera, is probably the most significant factor in how those children will fare later in life, how they will do in school, how they will do in their careers, whether they will have successful marriages themselves. The children who are raised in a single-parent situation in a broken home, as is often the term used for that because of divorce or unwed parenthood or whatever, the success rate of them in school and in all these other measurements really depends on whether they were raised by two parents, typically by their two biological parents or adoptive parents. And that's the biggest statistic, and we see the results of it in society.
And Barone makes that point in his article, too, when he says the numbers that show children raised by either two biological or adoptive parents do substantially better in every respect in life than those who are not. They do better in school and in higher education. They do better at jobs. They do better economically. They develop more stable and lasting relationships personally. They're more likely to earn success. What American Enterprise Institute Arthur Brooks identifies as the chief source of personal satisfaction and happiness. And you've talked about that at length before.
I have, and as I read that article, Gary, that you pointed it to when you called to see about me coming on the program, and you sent me or told me about this article, and I read it, and it brought flashbacks to me back to about I'm going to guess the year was about 2005 or 6, and I was testifying before a House Children and Youth Committee here in the state capitol in Harrisburg, and I said that very point. I specifically quoted from a study that said studies show that children fare best when raised by their biological mother and father. And I was taken to task by the chairman of that committee. She went after me very significantly. And then 2 days later, the Harrisburg Patriot News did an article excoriating me and saying that I attacked adoption.
Right.
Because I didn't happen to mention children fare well in adoptive situations. Now, I was quoting from a study. I didn't make the remark up, but it shows the problem that I think Michael Barone talks about in this, and he relates a book written by Mitch Pearlstein talking about this. They asked a number of experts, so what do we do about the family fragmentation? We know it's a problem. We know it's hurting the well-being of children. We know it's hurting society. It's costing taxpayers significant sums because of the programs, the remedial education programs that have to be put into place and the welfare programs, et cetera, as well as then incarceration rates that are significantly higher for those who are raised in broken families. But what do we do about it? And these experts said they don't know what we can do, and part of it is because if you raise the issue, you can get attacked.
Right.
People say, "Oh, you're passing judgment on people. You're saying single moms aren't worth it or anything." I'll say full disclosure: my parents divorced when I was still at home, and had impacts on our lives, etc. There are many moms or dads, single parents, who are doing heroic jobs, and their children are turning out well. But the statistics show, by and large, they won't do as well in that situation, and there is an ideal and a standard that we ought to talk about and point to as a society. But for the most part, if you try to raise that issue, you get attacked.
We welcome all of you.
The challenge.
We welcome all of you to call this morning with Michael Geer, 1-800-357-0910. Let's go to Tom in York. First up, Tom, you're on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA with Michael Geer. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, gentlemen. I just wanted to say that there comes a point in time where people have to sit down, and I say this both as a Christian man and as a conservative Republican, that money is not the solution. And furthermore, one of the attractive things about Islam blossoming with its numbers throughout the world is that they are judgmental and they have conviction in their beliefs, and there are too many Christian clergymen in this country, frankly, don't have the scrotum to bring up the judgmental side of Christianity, that when you womanize or promiscuous, whether you be male or a female, and the marriage bond is not the actual initiation of the family unit before there's any children, if there ever is any children, the man and the wife themselves as a couple are a family. Nothing can be done about it. This country is Judeo-Christian. I'm sorry that people like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and all that have an issue with that. That's what it is, a Judeo-Christian nation, and its destruction will be the undoing of that. And the fact is that in the Bible, there are consequences, financial and otherwise, and cultural, when everyone just has this attitude, there's never a consequence to making a big joke out of fidelity and being faithful to your spouse and to your children and all that stuff.
Well, and again, there are a lot of people who would like the norms to be different today, Tom. Appreciate your call this morning. But without getting the politics injected in this too much this morning, Michael, I really want to stay focused on the family. And,
right.
One of the points they make here is, the first compulsion maybe is to go out and to bash single-parent families. And that's not the idea. I mean, that is the reality some are facing in this time, and it has become acceptable to, everything is kind of disposable, and marriage has become one of those disposable things at a time where if people don't like it, they throw it away.
Well, that's right. And it's interesting because in Michael Barone's article, he talks about in the the mid 20th century into the early part of the 60s, there was what was called a stigma attached to the notion of having a child out of wedlock.
Yep.
And that has largely gone away, and now it has gone into the other direction. You hear a phrase used in society now, they call it slut shaming, which is basically now if you even suggest that promiscuous behavior or girls, if you will, that sleep around or whatever, that there's something wrong with that you are engaging in what's called slut shaming, and you should be excoriated, and there should be a stigma about even addressing people's personal behavior. And so you look at these like Lena Dunham types in that TV show Girls.
Exactly.
And they become promoted in society, and what becomes sort of the norm and the virtue, unfortunately, in this upside-down world that we live in, is to be promiscuous, to focus on personal. It's all about just self, and there's no sense of duty to others, about responsibility to raise your own children, or to be a productive member of society and to be part of helping promote the common good. When we focus solely on individual rights and individual happiness, ultimately nobody is happy in the end of it, because society begins to fall apart.
We've asked the question this hour, family fragmentation. Can anything be done? For all of you out there, this is something you're all involved in some way, shape, or form. Give us your thoughts on it. Maybe you found some things to be really successful. Do you agree with what's being said? Do you disagree? 1-800-357-0910. You mentioned about Mitch Pearlstein, who's the head of the Minnesota think tank, Center of the American Experiment, and he said that the fragmentation of the American family today is the biggest domestic problem facing this country. Do you agree with that? I
do. And, as you introduced me, I had the Pennsylvania Family Institute. When we were founded 25 years ago in 1989, this was the key issue that we wanted to focus on. We saw it. I mean, they talk about Daniel Patrick Moynihan in 1965 talking about this. He wrote a book called Defining Deviancy Down and described what was happening, especially at that time in the African-American family, and what that portended for the future. He was a liberal Democrat who was able to speak to that issue, but over time now it's left to few and far between to really raise these issues. And I'm glad that Mitch Pearlstein's written this book. I'm glad that Michael Barone's talking about it. We need to reinvigorate this debate and stop calling each other names, and let's have a legitimate discussion about, do we care about the well-being of children? Do we care about, this out-of-wedlock birth rate in the African-American community that's, 70% above? But Gary, I think last time I was on the program, I mentioned to you about my wife and I helping with a program called the Angel Tree Project.
Yes.
Which provides gifts to children of prisoners. And it's run by an organization called Prison Fellowship. It's a Christian-based thing. And so my wife and I, as I mentioned to you, delivered a gift to a single mom who had a 2-year-old child from a man who is now incarcerated. And when we met and gave that gift, she talked about, I hear music coming, so maybe I should finish the story afterwards.
Go ahead and finish it now. We'll take it out.
So what happened here is, anyway, we brought the gift, and she had this 2-year-old child, and they're living in very significant poverty. We went and visited her again, and she announced to us that she was pregnant by another man,
wow,
by someone else who she thinks is going to be really good.
Wow.
The government and the policies that provide benefits to people to continue to have children sort of are in competition with fatherhood, so there's no sense of responsibility that the fathers really have to take care of these kids, because there's going to be government programs that help. And the future of these kids is typically not going to be bright, and we need to be talking about these issues in society.
And as you mentioned, there are people who can raise kids, but they're trying to beat the odds. I mean, the odds don't say, we have to speak the truth here. And the truth of what is said out there, the truth of what is happening is a lot of kids aren't beating those odds. When we come back, Michael, we're going to have Beth and Mary join us here, 2 callers who are very interested in what's going on with the family, the fragmentation of the family. Can anything be done here in this country? There are 2 lines open, 1-800-357-0910, and you can join myself and Michael Barone right here on News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA with Michael Geer, president of the Pennsylvania Family Institute. And we're going to take some callers here as well. Beth in York, as we talk about the fragmentation of the family, can anything be done to make it better? And Beth, you're on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA with Michael Geer. Good morning, Beth. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I think Michael's doing pretty well too, aren't you, Mike?
I sure am.
Okay.
I had 2 things that I had noticed. The first thing, I despite the fact that I'm not Mormon, I've noticed that Mormons do a phenomenal job of encouraging families to stay together. And I'm wondering if, first of all, we need to be doing a lot more of that, because I'm not seeing a lot of that. And the second thing is, I was talking to a single dad, and he was really involved in his kid's life.
Right.
And I complimented him on it, and he was, and I said, at the risk of sounding, offensive, and he had no idea how important he as a father was in his children's lives. He had never been taught that fathers are just as essential as mothers in their children's lives. And so I went over some of the stats and, some of the benefits that he'll bring to his kids, just being more involved, even though he's not, staying with his mom right now. And I was wondering if we need to be working on educating dads a lot more.
Oh, it's a great question. Great question. We'll give it to Michael here to answer. Thank you, Beth.
Well, I think that's exactly right, and that's why organizations like the National Fatherhood Initiative were formed, and even during the Bush administration, G.W. Bush promoted fatherhood and marriage through government programs just to educate. They gave grants to organizations, one in Pittsburgh, one here in central Pennsylvania, and around the country, to help enlighten fathers on the irreplaceable role that they play in the lives of their children. And that is lost in society. It's not talked about too much. For the most part, in schools, we talk about, the pressure for schools to have what they call comprehensive sex education, which talk nothing about family life, talk nothing about the role of mothers and fathers and the important role that they play in society. Again, even bringing up those subjects, you get hammered with things like, you're just promoting gender stereotypes,
right,
and men and women are, the genders are kind of variable and not just equal, but exactly the same, and that's just not true. But there are those who are promoting that agenda in society. Those would be the same who I think are promoting the notion of same-sex marriage, and they say it doesn't matter whether it's a mother and a father, just as long as it's two people. But the studies and the common sense and millennia of human history show us that that's not true. Male and female, mother and father, are distinct and different and play distinct and different and important roles in the well-being of children.
1-800-357-0910. Feel free to agree, disagree, add some thoughts here about what do we do about family fragmentation. How do we get it back together? Mary in Hanover's next up on the Gary Sutton Show. You're with Michael Geer this morning. Good morning, Mary. How are you?
Good morning. I want to tell you that I was witness to how this all started. It started in 1965 with Lyndon Johnson having a great society. And it came across the news at that time that we were going to change our attitudes toward unwed mothers. We were going to change our attitudes toward things that we have had stigmas. Up until then, normal families existed, and if a girl was pregnant, it was kind of a sad thing. And sometimes these girls did not finish high school, but they went to an unwed mother's home. And the family then, when the child was either brought home or put up for adoption, the family continued. But there was no check for that child. Lyndon Johnson changed the whole thing with the Great Society, saying that women who had children needed financial support. And they brought in this thing called AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, families being the mother. So you end up right now 3 generations who think it's normal to get paid to have a baby. It's the oddest thing in the world to watch, because girls are now having sex earlier and earlier, and some of them have children at 13 and 14. And then they get a check, and their mother is happy and their father's happy, or if there is no father, somebody gets a check in the house. It's like a Social Security check, as long as she doesn't marry.
Mary?
It's the craziest thing in the world.
Mary, thank you for your thoughts. Let's get a reaction from Michael.
Yeah, I think she describes it very well. And back in the 90s when Clinton was president and Rick Santorum was the United States Senator, Rick Santorum pushed and succeeded in getting welfare reform to change some of the nature of AFDC, and they eliminated that program and changed it, I've forgotten what they called it after that, to stop incentivizing women and girls to have more children so they would get more government funding.
Exactly.
It also, what ended up happening with AFDC is it put government in competition with the father. Before, the father was viewed as, you've got to take responsibility for this child that you've created, that by your actions, this woman is pregnant, you have to take responsibility. Now the government is basically, through their own policies, has said, you're really unimportant. That's the lesson that AFDC has taught. And actually, if the father gets out of the picture, the child may be financially better in childhood, but the outcomes ultimately are much worse because government does not replace the father.
Michael, we're going to take a break here at the bottom of the hour. Can you stay with us a little longer?
Sure can. Yep.
We would love to have you, and we're going to talk more about this on the other side. Kevin's going to be a caller in with us. I want to hear from fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, wherever you are in the family. Fragmentation of the family. Can anything be done? Or maybe you don't think it's fragmented in the country. Maybe you think everything's just fine and you can stand up for that. But let's get into the conversation this morning. Michael Geer is the president of the Pennsylvania Family Institute, one of the most respected people I know around the country in talking about this. And he'll be glad to talk with you as well here on the Gary Sutton Show. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back on WSBA. It's 11:30. I'm just walking out during the break and just taking a quick walk and coming back. And I thought to myself of the poem Humpty Dumpty, who fell off the wall, and all the king's soldiers and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. And I wonder if we're in that situation as far as the family. I don't like to think of that possibility, but you have to raise it when you're talking about this subject. Michael Geer is the president of the Pennsylvania Family Institute and is back with us here on the Gary Sutton Show. We're going to go to Kevin in Lancaster and Bill in Shiloh in a moment, and you're welcome to join us too at 1-800-357-0910. But I was thinking about that, Michael, as I went to the break, that the Humpty Dumpty thing certainly comes to mind, and maybe the family has been broken into too many pieces and we have gone too far down the road to be able to restore it. Your thoughts?
Well, it is a very challenging issue to deal with. I mean, there's so many facets to it, from government policy dealing with things like welfare, as was talked about, AFDC, et cetera, to no-fault divorce and so many other things, as well as just the inability to talk about this without being called a hate monger or some other thing.
Some kind of ist. Yeah.
Exactly. I think, though, what we talk about is ultimately restoring personal responsibility. And that is a one-by-one sort of thing, where individuals in society, the dad and mom who are in a challenged marriage or relationship, start to say, hey, wait a minute, it depends on us. I'm not going to let these external forces or what government policy is dictate my behavior, but rather do what I think is right. And restoring some of those moral norms and traditional values and things is some of what we encourage at Pennsylvania Family Institute. It's not going to be done quickly or overnight, but we need to at least be talking about it. That's why I appreciate the opportunity to come on your program, and why I appreciate you noticing articles like that that sort of don't make the general conversation.
Well, I can't think of anything more important, because, the very basis of how we live is the family. That's where we start. And, as an old history teacher, I said the very lowest form of government is, maybe governing ourselves, but our families, how we operate within our families. I was looking, and again, people get upset by this sometimes, but you look at the numbers among the poorest 30%, and again, this was in the article by Michael Barone, but among the poorest 30% of whites, and among much larger percentages of Hispanics and blacks, divorce and single parenthood have become a way of life. That is exacerbated by the recent decline in college attendance by young men and the dearth of job opportunities for much less educated men. That makes them less marriageable and less prepared to take responsibility for children they may father. It goes on to talk about the idea of a bifurcated society. And I thought this was fascinating, not just because of income inequality, but because of the family formation patterns. This is something like the view taken in a 2013 speech by President Obama, which described family fragmentation as a consequence of economic inequality. But the idea is that as your family forms or does not form or breaks apart, that has a definite correlation to what you're going to be able to earn, whether you're marriageable or not. Those kind of things are all tied together. So this idea that the rich are taking from the poor here is not quite maybe the main reason. We have to look at some things a lot deeper than that.
No, that's exactly right. And I think, sort of the people who notice this the most in society, I think, are our heroic school teachers. They get bashed a lot, and our public education system has its problems and everything else. But you talk to the average school teacher across this Commonwealth or across this country, and they will tell you that they can tell the kids who are coming to classroom from intact families and those who are coming from broken families.
Yep.
And the schools that are faring more poorly and having a more challenging time of it and getting, scores up and all the rest of that kind of stuff are from regions of the state or particular, city or rural locations or whatever, where family breakup is more exacerbated, more significant. And everybody says, well, we just need more money and more government programs to fix that. But we don't have enough money to fix that. The family is, mom and a dad are the best health, education, and welfare institution ever devised. And until we get back to rebuilding that and realizing how important that is, we're going to continue to see societal decline. And again, I'm so glad we're talking about it here today.
Well, and the idea of throwing money at it is like putting a salve on an amputation. It's not going to work. I mean, you better find something else that's better than that. Let's go to the phone lines. We have 2 lines open. I want everyone to feel like they can get involved in this. Moms, dads, ladies, guys, brothers, sisters, whoever you are. Can we get it back together again? And what do we do to get there? We're trying to take on some real societal questions here in 2015. I can't think of a bigger one than this. Let's go to Kevin in Lancaster. Kevin, you're on the Gary Sutton Show with Michael Geer. Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
Hi, Gary. I'm fine. I read that article yesterday, too, which was who was the columnist that wrote that? Michael
Barone.
Yeah, that was right on. I actually was reading it last night, so it's interesting that you lit upon it today.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you read it, because I thought it's one of the better articles that I've read in a long time about family. But go ahead.
And Mike is a fabulous guest for you. Gosh, he's so right about so many aspects of this, especially about the shunning of protest over divorce.
Yes.
And that's a term I experienced that myself in personal. Sorry, my phone's going off here. Personal experience. And what I wanted to make a point about is that, this goes, you talk a lot about, let's put lower class or middle class or poorer people and the attitudes there. But I think it goes right up to the upper middle class in society right now, because if, for instance, you say, my spouse is not thinking of the kids, or my spouse is putting himself or herself first, you are branded as old-fashioned, sexist, wrong, bitter. If you say that that it's the kids are going to be damaged by this separation. They're going to be going back and forth like little waifs with their bags from one home to the next. Well, then they'll tell you, you're acting out of fear. You're not acting out of love. They'll say the kids will be fine. Children are so resilient. Don't worry. And these are the counselors that say this stuff, and it's an entire industry, because they want you to keep coming back. So they're not. If you do counseling to try to save a marriage with children, they're not going to say, "Hey, if one of you, for instance, if one of the spouses is cheating, and if infidelity is a factor, they're not going to say you're messing up. You're going to lose your children for half of the rest of your life."
Right.
They're not going to say that. They're going to say, how are you feeling? Are you scared? This is if it doesn't work out, well, then it's an opportunity for growth. You're not happy. He's not happy. It's your life. The language that's used is basically enabling a guiltless divorce, guiltless infidelity. There's basically no, what's the word? Not punishment, but the spouse that's in the wrong, does not really face much in the way of comeuppance when this goes down.
That's some good points there, Kevin. Thanks so much for calling, and thanks for listening. Michael, some good stuff there to react to.
Yeah, there was. It's interesting when he talked about even going into the upper middle class. Back in the time when Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote his thoughts about this with the out-of-wedlock birth rate among the African-American community, one of the things that was noted was among the elites in society, the very wealthy and stuff, divorce was more prevalent than in sort of the middle class and even lower class. And and they were more often engaged in affairs and kind of what we would describe as the troublesome behavior that has caused this. But at least I guess what I'm describing is sort of the way Hollywood folks live, and for the most part, at least they had the money to kind of fix it. If they caused some problem or whatever, they were rich and they could kind of take care of the problem. As those mores and those values have now come to sort of the grassroots and to the rank and file population and things, there are not the resources to kind of cover up and make do or send your kid off to some school or whatever to try to help them in that way. And anyway, so we've seen kind of this elite value system, unfortunately, come down to the regular population, and it has done nothing but harm for the well-being of children.
Welcome to the show this morning, 1-800-357-0910. Michael Geer, who's the president of the Pennsylvania Family Institute, with us as we talk about family fragmentation. Is there anything that can be done? There was one little fascinating small paragraph in this story, and we're going to get to Bill here in just a second, that jumped out at me. And it said, family fragmentation is unsettling nevertheless because it seems to be creating a two-tier society. In his 2012 book, Coming Apart, AEI scholar Charles Murray highlighted how among the wealthiest 20% of whites in the country, divorce rates and single parenthood have returned to 1950s levels after a blip upward in the 1970s. But among the poorest 30% of blacks and among much larger percentages of Hispanics and blacks, and we mentioned this earlier, the number is so much higher. Divorce and single parenthood have become a way of life. Kevin mentioned something when he was talking too, and I remember a movie, Blame It on Rio. I don't know if you ever saw it. But Michael Caine's in there, and he's talking with this guy in the beginning, and it's kind of a funny thing, but the guy's getting divorced. And he talks about how his wife wants all this stuff, and he's making a joke about the lawyers and so forth, and he said they're like vultures flying lazy circles above his head. But one of the things that has always stood out to me, and a line that Michael Caine said, and the guy Joe Bologna, I think, plays the other part, he says, well, I'm worried about my daughter. And Michael Caine comes back as the character and says, kids are resilient, they get over that. That seems to be a pretty big throwaway line. We hear an awful lot, but I don't know if kids are resilient. I don't know if they do get over it. They may not show it outwardly, but I think it does manifest itself later on in actions and maybe even in feelings down the line.
Well, the social science research shows that in spite of all these claims of resiliency, et cetera, that divorce and single parenthood has a very significant impact on the children. Interestingly, what the social science studies also show, though, is in a single-parent situation where, let's say, for example, the father of a child is killed at war, let's say in Iraq, the ability then of that single mom to talk about the father in respectful terms about, those children typically fare nearly as well as when there's a mom and dad there, because there is still a sense of there was a caring dad for me.
Right.
The mom can talk with respect about this dad who gave his life and loved you and cared for you. That gives a sense of belonging to that child that is not the case when dad just kind of planted the seed and left and has never shown up in the child's life. You see this with professional athletes oftentimes. Those who kind of exhibit the acting out behavior and stuff, you come to find they never had a dad in their home, or their mom had 5 different partners or whatever, those kinds of things.
Right.
Versus those who you say, wow, they seem like really stable people, and you come to find out, well, they were raised with a mom and a dad in the home.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of these athletes, and of course, we've been disappointed by a lot of athletes over the years, and yet at the same time, there are others out there who we look at, we learn their story, and we see, they had a pretty normal, we can kind of identify with that childhood, that they grew up with 2 parents, and 2 parents were interested in their welfare and how they were doing and their growth. Let's go to Bill in Shiloh next up. Bill, you're on the Gary Sutton Show with Michael Geer. Good morning, Bill. Go ahead. Your turn to make the call.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. I think, Michael, in talking with you and listening this morning, I think one of the things that we really have to center on are obviously with girls and boys. And I stated girls first because I think that girls and women in society have to be valued a lot more than what they are. And all you need to do is take a look at TV today and see how women are portrayed and put forth in very I will almost say pornographic in some instances ways, And this then can spill over to the home, and depending upon whether the dad is around, women may not be valued as much in a single home as they would be otherwise. And the responsibility end of it goes to the two boys, because they have the responsibility to know just exactly what they're doing and how it is that they treat women. And if you take a look at a mom and dad love one another, and they are respected within the home, and they are respected in their personal relationship, this then translates or transfers down to the children. And this is how that bond is formed. But and you take a look at what happens outside the family union. Well, you have school and you have church. Now, we've taken religion out of school, and maybe people are tending to shy away from church, or they haven't been brought up around the church and so forth. And these are can be tremendous support mechanisms. But if a woman does not have value in herself, she might be looking into a man, and then you get into the whole subject of abortion and the circumstances that we have with that. And that's why the value of women really has to be brought to the fore, so that they recognize the fact that in all of society, they are valued for who it is that they are and what it is that they can contribute, not just to be figured in as some sort of toy or vessel or something.
Or an object of some kind, yeah. Bill, thank you so much. Michael, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. I'll let you react to that. Bill gave you a lot to think about there. And we also have James and Hershey next up with Michael Geer as we talk about family fragmentation. What can be done, if anything? And we'll ask Michael, what are some of the solutions out there? Michael said it's going to take a while, but we'll talk about it more when we return right here on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Confucius once said something along the lines, it doesn't matter how slow you go, just don't stop. It's been a slow process here, hurting marriage in this country. It may be a slow process getting it back. Is it possible? The fragmentation of marriage is what we're talking about this morning, and can we do something about it? Michael Geer is the president of the Pennsylvania Family Institute with us here on the Gary Sutton Show. Michael, I wanted to get your reaction to Bill's last call, and then I want to get James from Hershey in here also. Go ahead.
Well, I think he made a lot of good points. What's interesting about the points that he made, though, if made them in certain forums, he would be called a sexist and being told that he was being patronizing towards women. We just have these debates shut off all the time to say, because there are those who are continue to want to say there's no difference between men and women, and to suggest that we should extol or point out the importance of the role of women or something is somehow a sexist thing, and that points to the problem that we have to address in talking about these issues. One of the things I did want to mention real quick, Gary, is in the article by Michael Barone, talks about the numbers of intact families where there is a mom and a dad, but he said these numbers include step-parents, and when you take into account findings that child abuse by stepfathers is substantially above average, that's not entirely good news. It reminds me back in the, I think it was in the late 90s or early 2000s, I was on what was then Attorney General Mike Fisher here in Pennsylvania had set up a commission on dealing with domestic or family violence, as it was called. And they were people from all different kind of walks of life and different political persuasions in these meetings that we had. And I brought up in one particular meeting talking about how to address domestic and child abuse. And I said, well, the studies show that the most dangerous situation for a woman and her children is to have a live-in boyfriend who is not related to the children, that exposes her and those children to the greatest amount of possibility of abuse. And I just remember eyes rolling and people shaking their heads and saying, we can't say anything like that or cast judgments because that will make people feel like they can't live the way they want to.
Wow.
I said, well, wait a minute. I thought we're here to address child abuse and domestic violence. And if we can't tell people the truth, that having a live-in boyfriend who's not related to your children puts them at substantial risk, then how are we going to solve the problem? And that's the problem is just we got to start talking about it. And again, that's why I don't want to sound like a broken record, but so glad we're talking about it here.
Well, and how we get to a better place. Let's get James and Hershey in here. James, you're on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Always good to have you in. You're with Michael Geer this morning. Good morning, James.
Hey, good morning, Gary. Thanks for taking my call. Happy New Year to you both.
Happy New Year.
I would like to say that I'm not sure if statistically you looked at education, because those who tend to be educated don't run into the same pitfalls. And I don't want to say it's foolproof that, you get a college education and your life's going to be perfect. However, it's my understanding and belief that especially when it comes to women who have an education don't tend to fall in the same sort of category. A lot of these issues...
And that's one of the things we mentioned in the very beginning, by the way, that the education is a very important part of this. And he put that in the article. We probably didn't hammer that as much as we've hammered some of the other things, though. So go ahead.
Right. But a lot of these issues, hit home for me directly because, I have kids and I've gone through a divorce and so on and so forth. But if women aren't told that they are important and they actually have more control in a situation, a relational situation than men, because women are brought up to believe that they don't, then they actually have the upper hand. And it's a shame that it comes down to, this power struggle that, who has control and who is the dominant one. But unfortunately, that's how it is. So, I would like to say I caught the show at the latter portions.
Oh, not a problem. But
thanks for hearing me out. And
always good to hear your opinion, James.
Job.
Thank you.
Hey,
and we look forward to talking to you again. Michael, one of the things that comes to mind here as I listen to James and other people, and you and I have talked, marriage has become a casualty, I think, of a larger problem, which is that which was established in America for a long time as good has now come under attack, that everything that was good now is very suspect. And if you were in the majority of the people who thought that it was good, you are now held up in contempt many times, and that's a big problem.
Yeah. Well, and I guess what it would boil down to kind of just what I had talked about when I was on the Attorney General's Commission dealing with domestic violence, and basically being told, look, you can't cast judgments on people's behavior.
Right.
And I said, well, wait a minute, we are casting judgments. We say domestic violence is bad. Hitting women is bad. Hitting children is bad. Abusing them is bad. So let's take a step back further and say, well, what's causing that and what puts people at risk for that? And then they say, oh, no, you can't say that's bad, the live-in boyfriend who's not related to your children. Well, why not? And so all it boils down to is every society draws lines somewhere and says this is good or this is bad. Right now we're in a situation that says judgment is bad, or making any kind of value judgment on people's behavior is bad, because people should be free to do whatever they want with no regard to the consequence to themselves, to their children, to the greater society. And as long as we adhere to that kind of value system, which is basically saying that everybody can do what is right in their own eyes, we're not going to see society progress.
Yeah, there is no society truth. I'm often reminded of Give 'em Hell, Harry Truman, who said, I never gave anyone hell, I just told them the truth. They thought that's what it was. And, when you look at a lot of the facts out there, and when you're on that commission, I'm sure it probably went through your mind, let's take a look at the numbers here. You put someone in that live-in home there, or the single-family home, are they going to do better? Do they have a better shot at life than the person over here in a relatively stable mother-father home? And the answer is no, they don't. The numbers aren't going to lie. And so those are the cold facts. Now, to try to cover those over today by shouting you down or saying you're some kind of phobic or ist or whatever, that's not a conversation that's going to better our country. Final 25 seconds here. Your thoughts on if we can do something to get this fragmentation back together again?
Well, I think in the policy arena, I think we can look at the government policies that encourage out-of-wedlock births, that encourage families to break up. I think reforming no-fault divorce is something we've talked about at Pennsylvania Family Institute for a long time. I think a number of the callers have talked about churches getting involved and making a difference. I think parenting classes and talking about just the value of delaying sexual activity until adulthood, until marriage is vitally important. There's a whole slew of things, and that's what we're about here at Pennsylvania Family Institute.
Michael, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. It won't be the last time we discuss this, and always a pleasure having you on.
Yep, thanks, Gary. Happy New Year again.
Happy New Year to you, my friend.